So Danielle Smith has been feeding Alberta's grievance machine for 2 years now, giving Separatists just enough oxygen to keep the fire burning while insisting that she's not the one holding the match. But this week, a Canadian court stepped in and said, "Not so fast there, Danielle. You do not get to put breaking up the country on a fast track while ignoring the constitutional rights of First Nations."
A judge ruled the entire Alberta Separatist petition process unconstitutional, and in doing so, exposed the single most important fact about this campaign that Smith has been hoping nobody would notice. She didn't just enable a grassroots movement, she enabled a foreign-backed operation. And she's calling the court ruling that stopped it anti-democratic?
Well, today, we're going to walk you through what the court actually ruled, why this is such a major setback for Alberta Separatists, why Smith's reaction tells you everything about the politics she's been playing, and how this ruling lands in a much bigger moment, with foreign actors, U.S. interference, and online agitators all trying to turn Alberta's frustration into Canada's weakness.
Because the people who needed Canada weak and fractured at the trade table just had their best weapon taken away, and it came from the last place they expected, the Canadian Constitution itself.
So let's start with what Justice Shania Leonard actually ruled. The petition was quashed because Alberta failed in its duty to consult First Nations before proceeding. Now, that sounds kind of procedural. It's not. Consultation on matters that affect treaty rights is a constitutional obligation. It's not optional. It doesn't disappear because enough people actually sign a form.
The treaties in question are Treaties 7 and 8. They are agreements that cover enormous portions of Alberta and governed land. It has resources and governance rights. They were signed between the First Nations and the Crown, and they were signed more than a century ago. If Alberta separates, there's no Crown in the equation anymore. There's a new country. And the people whose rights are tied to those agreements had the constitutional right to be consulted before anyone moves forward.
Now, First Nation leaders made exactly that argument, and the court agreed. The duty to consult is not a veto. It's meaningful engagement before decisions are made that affect fundamental rights. So Alberta just skipped that entirely and went straight to collecting signatures.
And when Stay Free Alberta announced they had 302,000 signatures, they were already operating under a cloud, because submitted signatures are not the same as verified signatures, and verified signatures don't override constitutional obligations. The court made both of those points explicit.
So the petition is quashed pending appeal, and Smith has announced that she'll appeal and has called the ruling incorrect in law.
She also called it anti-democratic. A premier calling a constitutional court ruling protecting Indigenous treaty rights anti-democratic? You know what's actually anti-democratic? Running a separatist campaign that tries to bypass the constitutional rights of people who have lived on that land longer than the province of Alberta has existed. Smith conveniently left that part out.
Yeah, she's positioning herself as the voice of democratic grievance while ignoring the people the court said she was constitutionally required to consult. The convenience of that position, that is not accidental here.
This is the same conservative ecosystem that went into a full meltdown about Barack Obama giving a speech in Toronto.
Loganat, coup, treason. Laura Loomer called it a constitutional crisis. Others were calling for Obama's arrest, all because a former president gave a keynote address at a public summit on economic security and AI governance. Oh, the hypocrisy is all over the place here.
Obama was at a podium. There was no negotiations. There was a microphone and a conference room.
But Alberta Separatists, Canadians going to Washington, meeting with U.S. officials, seeking American political backing for separating a province from Canada? Well, hey, apparently that's just a networking opportunity.
Obama at a public summit in Toronto equals constitutional crisis. Canadian separatists actively courting a foreign government for money to fracture Canada? Oh, that's legitimate political activity.
Meanwhile, the actual foreign interference in Canadian politics, the kind involving real governments backing real efforts to fracture real provinces, well, that just gets waved on through.
And the foreign hand here, it's not subtle. Russia's Storm 1516 network, a documented covert influence operation, was tied to fake Alberta separatist websites. The goal was to take real grievances and make the divisions bigger, louder, and harder to repair.
You know, Alberta has legitimate frustrations with Ottawa. All provinces in Canada do. No one's going to agree with the federal government on everything. And those are worth taking seriously, whether it be about Western alienation or energy policies. All those tensions are real and deserve to be addressed.
But the people amplifying the loudest version of those frustrations are not interested in Alberta winning better policy outcomes. They want Canada weaker at the trade table and less stable as a sovereign country. Alberta is being used as a lever. It's not being helped, it's being used. And the court finally just yanked that lever away.
Now, we do have to talk about Danielle Smith's position after this ruling, because it's genuinely revealing. She says that she doesn't personally support separation, which is fine, but she rewrote the referendum rules to make the Separatist petition easier to run. She fed that grievance machine day in and day out, and now she's calling a constitutional ruling protecting Indigenous rights anti-democratic and vowing to appeal it?
There's a word for calling a court ruling anti-democratic when it protects treaty rights. It's not conservatism. It's not even populism. It's disqualifying. A premier who argues that constitutional protections for Indigenous peoples are anti-democratic has told you exactly what kind of leader she is and whose script she's reading.
She's been trying to play both sides, demanding the political energy of separatist anger without taking the separatist label. But those two things, they can't coexist with a court ruling that says your referendum process violated constitutional law.
Alberta deserves leadership that takes its grievances seriously. There's no argument with that. Leadership that negotiates hard and wins real policy outcomes. But what Smith is doing is not that.
No, she's feeding resentment while making Alberta more exposed to foreign interference, to constitutional fights it can't win, and to being seen as the preferred vehicle for destabilizing Canada on behalf of the people who don't live there.
When you court foreign governments to pressure your own country and call court rulings anti-democratic when they don't go your way, you're not fighting for Alberta. You're fighting for your base, and those are two very different things.
And this is where Canadian media needs to be way more careful, because too much of the coverage is giving Danielle Smith a giant microphone to frame this as another grievance against Alberta instead of leading what actually happened and what's actually important.
Exactly. First Nations took a serious constitutional issue to court and they won. Treaty rights were upheld. The duty to consult was reinforced. The rule of law did what it was supposed to do. And that's not a side note. That should be the headline and the only headline.
But instead, the focus in Canadian media keeps drifting back to Smith's reaction. Smith says it's anti-democratic. Smith says she will appeal. Smith says Albertans deserve the debate. Fine, quote her. We're not saying don't do that. She is the premier of Alberta. But don't let her turn a First Nations legal victory into another episode of Alberta grievance theater.
Because the court didn't silence Albertans. The court said the Alberta government cannot treat constitutional obligations like paperwork that it can finish later. That's a good thing for democracy, everyone. It means that governments do not get to just rush past legal treaties just because the politics are loud.
And this is the responsibility of the press in a moment like this. Do not simply amplify the most divisive voice in the room because it gives you the easiest headline. Explain what the ruling protects. Explain who brought the case. Heck, explain why treaty rights matter to the stability of Canada as a whole.
If the only story people hear is Smith fights back, then the public misses the entire point and the bigger truth. This was a major win for First Nations, and it was a major setback for separatists who are trying to divide Canada and using foreign interference as their vehicle. It's a major reminder that Canada's constitution still has a spine.
And that matters even more when you look at who has been amplifying Alberta separatism from outside the country.
Surprise, it's Trump and Russia. They needed a weapon to fracture Canada. A separatist petition backed by a foreign amplification operation enabled by a provincial premier and cheered on from Washington. A Canadian court applying constitutional law that predates the province of Alberta itself, it just destroyed it.
What happened in that courtroom, we have to remember, was a great signal. The constitutional guardrails in this country are standing, and they're not operational because enough people signed a form at a table.
Yeah, listen, we're not the USA. I know that Trump has rigged their court system, but Canada has a court that matters and we have stability that is lasting. So the court didn't just protect a treaty right, it protected Canada's stability during the most important trade negotiations this country has had in decades.
So here's our question to you today. Does Smith's appeal succeed? And if this ruling holds, does it end the separatist petition process permanently? Or does the movement find another door and another way around?
Drop your thoughts in the comments and tell us what you're seeing. If you're from Alberta, we really want to hear from you.
And remember, subscribe if you're not already subscribed, and share this if it connects the dots that the mainstream coverage skipped. And also check out the pinned comment down below to help support this channel, and don't forget to give this video a hype.
Thanks for watching, everyone, and we shall see you tomorrow.
Ciao for now.